Every single NFC South team brings an interesting QB story, and each one's unique within the division this year. Even if you're not specifically interested in those quarterbacks for fantasy, how they fare this year is bound to dramatically impact the fantasy outlook for someone that you do care about, or perhaps someone that you're currently overlooking but should care about. We're going to dig into every one of those QB stories and the players you should either fade or target in your drafts from the NFC South this season. An all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now.
It's the Draft Sharks.
Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here for episode 5 of the divisional preview series. We're hitting the NFC South today. Jared, I thought about trimming my face up to look good for our YouTube viewers, but then I was like, nah, we're in the thick of things now. Training camp has started. This is basically my playoff beard, which is going to be at varying levels over the next 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, this is about as good as my beard gets, so not going to get any deeper than this for me.
Playoff beard, by the way, is a hockey term for those of you out there who are like, what are you talking about? That was for Jared's benefit. But for your benefit, we're going to go ahead and jump right into these NFC South teams. We're going to go in alphabetical order, just like always. And that starts with the Atlanta Falcons. Jared, what did last season look like for these guys?
Yeah, this was a good offense last year, despite Kirk Cousins kind of crumbling down the stretch and them turning to their rookie quarterback. The Falcons did finish 13th in the league in points last year. They were 6th in yards, 9th in yards per play. This was a fast-paced offense. The Falcons were 9th in offensive pace, 4th in neutral pace. That helped them finish 8th in total play. So they definitely had, play volume on their side. It was a balanced offense in terms of run-pass split. They were 24th in pass rate, 17th in neutral pass rate. The Falcons finished top 10 in both pass yards and rush yards last year. They were 5th in the NFL in pass yards, 10th in rushing yards. One last note on this team I thought was interesting. They went really run heavy inside the red zone. They were 31st in red zone pass rate, 30th in red zone pass rate over expected. They leaned run everywhere, but they especially went run heavy near the goal line.
And we're still going to have to see how things develop this year. It's just year 2 under the coaching staff that arrived last season. The biggest change isn't a full change, but it's Michael Penix Jr. starting from week 1. He did step into the lineup last year, but just 3 starts at the end of the season. That was mostly Kirk Cousins and not the usual version of Kirk Cousins. Otherwise, the offense looks very similar to last year's. Center Drew Dahlman is gone after starting for most of the past 3 seasons, but even his replacement, Ryan Newsel, is in his 4th year with the team, started 8 games last year. So the Falcons are really playing for improvement in year 2 under that new coaching staff, as opposed to looking to change a whole lot versus what they did last season.
Yeah, tons of continuity here outside of the quarterback change. The coaching staff is back. Last year's top 10 target getters are all back. So basically no change in terms of the weapons. And then 4 of the 5 starting offensive linemen were back. And this was a good O-line last year. And I think it projects to be a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit in 2025.
There are plenty of attractive players here, Jared, but I can't say that I have any strong targets in my draft. So I guess before we get to breaking down the individuals, is there any Falcon that you're actually targeting in drafts right now?
No, there's no one who stands well above where we have them ranked. I'll start with Bijan Robinson because for me, we do 100+ best ball drafts. So we're trying to diversify and not be too in on one player. But if I'm doing one draft or one big money draft, it'd be Jamar Chase, number 1 for me. And number 2, I'm taking Bijan Robinson ahead of Saquon Barkley, ahead of CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. I just think Bijan Robinson combines safety with upside. This guy was the RB4 last year in both PPR and half PPR. And he was actually even better over the second half of last season. He was in more of a timeshare with Tyler Algier over the first 8 games, but over the final 9 games of last season, Bijan Robinson was 2nd among running backs in expected fantasy points, 3rd in actual fantasy points. He averaged 20.9 carries per game, 4.1 targets per game. He also started to dominate the goal line carries. We talked about how run heavy the Falcons went near the goal line. Bijan got 57% of the team's carries inside the 5 over the first 8 games. He was losing some work to Algier down there. 81% of Atlanta's carries over the final 81% of Atlanta's carries inside the 5 over the final 9 games of the season. So it all just kind of sets up, I think, for Bijan to be potentially even better than he was last year. I think he's still a young ascending player.
Yeah, drafters were obviously immediately excited when Bijan Robinson arrived as a top 10 pick. We know those guys tend to get the ball a ton right away. He didn't get the ball a ton right away versus that expectation as a rookie. Second half of last year, we did finally get what we were expecting Bijan Robinson to be from the start. And that's the guy I expect him to remain this year. We've talked about him before. He's going too early to say, oh, Bijan Robinson's a target for me, because you can't get him unless you're picking somewhere among the top 6 and your league mates help him get to you. But he's certainly a guy I like within that range, somebody I'm drafting ahead of Saquon Barkley. I like him as a top 3, top 4 pick, depending on the format. He's basically the reason that I would not take a wide receiver in any of the top like 4 or 5 spots. He would be the guy that I'm targeting in there. Drake London is similar in that he's going early enough that it's tough to call him a target. He's not somebody that I'm out on, not somebody that I'm overly in on. He's mid round 2 in ADP, wide receiver 9. The biggest thing working against me wanting Drake London more is that AJ Brown is more undervalued within that tight window, I think.
Yeah, it's fair. Drake London is 18th overall in our PPR rankings. He's also 18th overall in the most recent ADP. Fine. I think he's like a nice, safe double in the second round of fantasy drafts. I don't think he's going to be a top 3 fantasy wide receiver and be a total home run. I think there's very little bust risk here. We talked about all the continuity in Atlanta. That makes London a very safe bet to remain the clear top target in this passing game. He's just entering the prime of his career at this point. Could even still be getting better. And last year was really good. He was 4th among all wide receivers in total PPR points. He was just 14th in points per game, but he was 3rd among wide receivers in targets. He was 6th among wide receivers in target share. So that made him 9th at the position in expected PPR points per game. So it's a really strong role for a quality player. The quarterback change, I think Michael Penix adds more uncertainty to the situation, but he could be an upgrade over the version of Kirk Cousins we got last year. And small sample, but in Michael 3 games last year, Drake London averaged 13 targets per game, 7.3 catches, 117 yards. He was the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game over those final 3 games of the season with Michael Penix.
Yeah, I was going to say we should not expect him to match those numbers over a full season, what he did in those 3 games with Michael Penix. But if things continue down a path like that, he certainly does still have upside, even from a wide receiver 9 ADP, an early round 2 draft position. So there's upside here. I'm certainly not against Drake London at all. Darnell Mooney is the other guy I'll mention on the side of fine value. He's wide receiver 49, end of round 9 ADP. Fine. And I think he's especially fine at best ball time. He's a guy that I like to draft at cost onto a best ball roster. Not so interested once we get to lineup setting, because I don't think that Darnell Mooney is going to become the kind of guy that we comfortably put into lineups. Even with a Drake London injury, I don't expect that Darnell Mooney would then become like a 24, 25+% target share player. So he's just okay at that point. I'm not going to be a target for me in lineup setting formats.
Yep, I have the same exact note on Darnell Mooney. I like him as a floor pick in best ball. One of the nice things about the Falcons is that they don't rotate their wide receivers. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod are going to be out there for like 90+% of the pass play. So, that helps the floor on Darnell Mooney. He is wide receiver 48 in ADP right now, and he finished 39th among wide receivers in PPR points per game last year. Now, he was just 49th at the position in expected PPR points. So we did kind of outproduce his usage. The one thing I'll say with Darnell Mooney is we didn't see it last year. Mooney played 2 games with Michael Penix. He missed one of Penix's starts. He caught 5 balls for 82 yards in the first, 2 catches for 37 yards in the second. So the production wasn't awesome. But Michael Penix, one thing he did is he had a very high average target. He threw the ball downfield quite a bit, and he was first in PFF deep passing grade last year. Again, small sample size, but he was that way in college too. He has a big arm, aggressive passer, and that fits what Darnell Mooney did for this offense last year. He got 22 targets, 20+ yards downfield. That led the Falcons and was 13th among all wide receivers. So Michael Penix, and just the way he plays and his ability to push the ball downfield, could definitely be good news for Mooney.
Yeah, he should fit Mooney style-wise, and Mooney has been a good player through his time in the league so far. Not an amazing wide receiver, but a good one. That's why he got paid by Atlanta, was productive in Chicago before that. On the fade side, I don't really want to strongly call Kyle Pitts a fade because he's tight end 17. There's nothing wrong with taking a shot on him at that point, mid-round 12 in our consensus PPR ADP. He's not a target for me, though, because he hasn't done enough over the past couple of years, and I'm not really sure the Falcons even either know how to use him or care to use him in a way that would maximize his fantasy upside. One note that I got from Will McFadden of the team website tweeted out this morning that we're recording the show that Pitts has mostly been working with the Falcons wide receivers so far, not with the tight ends. That's not really surprising because he's typically been used more like a wide receiver through his career. Maybe it tells us something about where he's going to line up. It doesn't tell us a whole lot about his playing time, about his route share, or about what his target outlook is. So really, I'm just kind of neutral on Kyle Pitts at this point.
Yeah, like I'm not going to fault anyone for taking a shot on him. He's not even 25 yet. He turns 25 in October, and 25 is actually peak age for tight ends according to our aging curve research. So I'm not totally burying him, but there's really nothing to like about what we saw last year, even the last couple of years now. Last year, Pitts was tight end 25 in PPR points per game, 24th in expected PPR points per game, and he's just heading in the wrong direction. He had a career low target share last year, 13.2%, career low yards per route last year, 1.33. Every time I hear the Falcons coaches talking about Kyle Pitts, it's always like, he still needs to get better at this. He still needs to figure this out. They still want and need a lot more out of him. He's 25. Maybe it's going to happen for him this season. The price tag is okay. But I don't find myself drafting Kyle Pitts very often.
He's kind of like the fantasy tight end version of Juju Smith-Schuster. For years, we were all like, yeah, but those first 2 years in Pittsburgh, guys just don't do that and then turn into bums. With Kyle Pitts, it's like, yeah, but that first year was so awesome. And then he had the knee injuries, just got to recapture it. You can see the market pulling back from that a little bit. And I think we've reached the point where it's like, yeah, he started out great. It hasn't been great since then. So we'll see what he does for now. Tyler Algier, RB48, mid-round 14. He shows as a strong negative value if you look at our ADP market index page. That's a little bit misleading for him in particular, for his type of player, because Tyler Algier is going to be a bad fantasy option if Bijan Robinson's healthy. He's going to be a strong option, though, if Bijan Robinson goes down. So you can be either in or out on Algier because none of us knows how healthy Bijan Robinson's going to be, but that's the only measure for Algier's value.
Yeah, I think it's a fine price for a high-end handcuff, and that's what I think Algier is. Like you said, Matt, I don't think he's going to be a standalone option, but I do think if Bijan Robinson went down, that Algier would be someone that we're ranking easily inside the top 20 running backs, maybe even inside the top 15 running backs. He's very good. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry last year. Actually, Algier beat Bijan Robinson last year in missed tackles forced per attempt and yards after contact per attempt. And the big thing here is that I was looking at Atlanta's depth chart. Their number 3 running back is currently Carlos Washington, the 2023 undrafted free agent out of southeastern Louisiana, who I had not heard of until I looked up the Falcons depth chart prior to this podcast. So if Bijan goes down, like Algier is going to get almost all of the backfield work.
You can bet Shane's familiar with that guy and knows his whole backstory.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Penix Jr., the only other guy here I think worth talking about. Strongly negative value as well by our ADP market index, but that's at QB 22. I'm not interested in Penix because I don't think the upside is intriguing for fantasy. But if you're like, I disagree, then I'm not going to argue because I don't really care about quarterback 22.
Yeah, Penix is someone I've wondered if we're a bit too low on even. I think, there is some upside here when you look at his arm talent and aggressiveness as a passer. The weapons are good. The offensive line is good. Again, there's continuity on the coaching staff. This was a fast-paced offense last year. Penix did a lot of good stuff in his 3 starts last year. He had an 87.6 PFF passing grade that led all 6 rookie quarterbacks last year that had 100+ dropbacks. Again, we're just talking about a 3-game sample, so this is a small sample size, but he had the 10.1 yard average target depth. He led all 46 qualifying quarterbacks in deep passing grade. Last point, I wonder if there's any rushing upside with Michael Penix. We have not seen it in the box score yet. He had 11 total rushing yards in his 3 games last year, and he averaged just 8.4 rushing yards per game in college, but he ran a 4.46 40 at the combine. And then their offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, made a comment in May. Robinson said, quote, his speed is on par with some of our top receivers. So that's definitely an element that we're looking to explore. So I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if we're going to get design run plays out of Penix, but it's something I'll be watching for reports on in training camp and maybe even in preseason action.
I'm going to need to see that happen on a football field before I'm factoring it into his fantasy outlook. He had the knee issues in college that really extended his career and probably made him more of a pocket passer. But he also had 2 full starting seasons at Washington post-injury where we didn't see him run at all. So maybe he's capable of it. I'm going to have to see it before I'm giving him a boost. And he's just like down in a range of quarterback where you could say, yeah, I could see him being higher. And then you look at the guys around him, you're like, oh yeah, I could see that guy being higher. Oh yeah, I could see that guy being higher. So he doesn't stand out as a target in that range for me.
Yep, exactly. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year if we look up and Penix finished like quarterback 15.
For sure. And I think what you can draw from that is that pool of quarterbacks. If you're playing in a super flex league, you can push off a quarterback decision at a certain point and say, I'll just grab 2 of these guys and see what happens with them.
For sure. Exactly.
Another one of those guys plays for the Carolina Panthers. Jared, what did this team look like in 2024?
Yeah, tough year for the offense in Dave Canales' first season. The Panthers last year finished 23rd in points. They were 29th in yards, 24th in yards per play. They were better over the second half of the season. If you look at their points per game, first 7 games, which included a rough start for Bryce Young and then Andy Dalton for most of that, 15.7 points per game over the first 7. That jumped to 23.1 points per game over their final 10. That would have ranked 13th in the NFL. So in terms of points per game, this was a league average offense over the final 10 games of last season. In terms of the run pass split in Carolina last year, they finished 11th in pass rate, but they were 22nd in neutral pass rate. They wanted to run a bit more than they were able to because they weren't very good. Another note here, though, and this is, I guess, the opposite of what we saw in Atlanta, is Carolina went pass heavy inside the red zone. They were 4th in pass rate inside the red zone, 5th in pass rate over expected inside the red zone. So, that's a potential mark in favor of Bryce Young and these wide receivers as we look ahead to 2025.
Yeah, it's going to be a more interesting offense. That they were league average in scoring at any point last year is probably a credit to Dave Canales and Bryce Young. We'll get more into those guys in a minute. It is still Dave Canales as the head coach. He's got the same OC as he had last year. The biggest change in Carolina is Tetairoa McMillan arriving as the 8th overall pick. It was interesting because early in draft season, he emerged as the favorite to be that 8th pick. And then I think everybody just kind of drifted toward, the Panthers are going to take an edge player. And then I think most folks were surprised that they didn't take Jalen Walker by the time we got to draft time. But it is Tetairoa McMillan. He now goes to an offense that had Xavier Legette lead the team in targets last year at 84. Legette's 3.1 receptions per game, though, ranked just 3rd on the team behind Adam Thielen, 4.8, and Deontay Johnson, RIP, 4.3. So it's not that Xavier Legette was so good last year. It's that the team was so bad, it didn't have anywhere else to throw the ball for a lot of the season. Miles Sanders also out as RB2. Jonathan Brooks, not expected to be a factor this season after re-tearing the ACL he tore in college. The Panthers did sign Rico Dowdle in free agency to a modest 1-year contract. They drafted Trevor Etienne in round 4 out of Georgia. That pair of moves, Jared, says to me that the Panthers want to improve their backfield receiving. That's the area where Chuba Hubbard was not particularly good last year.
Yes, and we will get to that. That's the big sticking point with Hubbard. Etienne's interesting. They took him pretty early in round 4 as the 9th running back off the board. That's ahead of guys like Dylan Sampson, Jarquez Hunter, Jaden Blue. I feel like those guys are getting more hype, especially in redraft, as like flyers, where Etienne's kind of flying under the radar. But, a decent investment in Etienne. Their note on the Panthers here, they returned all 5 of their offensive line starters, which I always like. And this O-line was better than I realized last year. PFF had them 8th in run blocking grades, 15th in pass blocking grades. And again, all 5 starters back. It's a pretty young unit overall. I think the O-line could be a mark in this team's favor.
I agree. You always like the continuity unless the offensive line stunk. And even in those cases, sometimes simply bringing the same unit back can help it be better the following year. There are no real targets for me on this Panthers offense. What about you?
I'd agree with that. Nothing I'm aggressively pursuing in drafts. So we'll start with Tetairoa McMillan. If you look at consensus ADP, he's wide receiver 28. He goes higher than like Underdog and even some of the other best ball sites. When you get into more of your home leagues, I think Tetairoa McMillan's going to be a value. We have him wide receiver 25 in our PPR rankings. Just a really clean prospect profile. He was the number 4 wide receiver prospect in the 2022 recruiting class. He was a big time recruit, led all true freshmen in the entire country in receiving yards in 2022. McMillan breaks out in 2023 as a true sophomore, 90 catches, nearly 1,400 receiving yards. Sets new career highs last year with 7.0 catches and 110 receiving yards per game. He's 6'4", 219 pounds. I get like Drake London vibes watching Tetairoa McMillan. Like, he's not an explosive athlete. He's not going to make big plays, but just big-bodied, athletic enough to create separation, good in contested situations. He has a clear path to number 1 wide receiver duties here. Like you mentioned, Matt, they had Xavier Legette lead this team in targets last year. Adam Thielen, who's close to 40, it feels like, was playing a big role down the stretch. So, like, if Tet is ready, he has every opportunity to be a pretty clear target leader for this team.
Yeah, he didn't seem to hit the draft as as the type of thrilling wide receiver prospect that we've had leading some recent classes. So I think that makes it easier to overlook him a little bit. I am similar where I haven't really been drafting him in best ball, but he's going significantly later according to the ADP that we have in non-best ball drafts in lineup setting formats. And at wide receiver 28, I certainly have no problem with Tet McMillan. And honestly, over the past few years, I haven't done great with rookie wide receivers because I tend to be too quick to deem them overvalued just based on our initial target projections and not look enough at the likelihood that they're going to improve as the season goes on, and just the uncertainty of how targets are going to get spread on teams that, at the very least, are adding this new guy and probably have some other questions to answer with how they spread targets around. So I'm going to make sure that I stay interested in Tet McMillan at the price where he's going, as long as it doesn't climb too high. Certainly fine in drafts, and as we both mentioned already, he joins a team that needs him to be very good because I don't think Xavier Legette's good. And I do realize that Adam Thielen is just getting older and older.
Yeah, it's a good point about the rookies. I'll say, too, though, that I think we remember the big hits that we might have missed on. Brian Thomas Jr. definitely stands out. But, I mean, there are the Legette's, Keon Coleman's, the rookie Pearsall's. I think it's just important to evaluate each rookie wide receiver separately. You don't want to be all in on all rookie wide receivers. But someone like Tet McMillan, who I thought was an excellent prospect, got the draft capital, gets a situation where he could, get 25% of the targets right out of the gate. Like if he's going in low end wide receiver 2 to high end wide receiver 3 range, that's definitely something I want to be in on.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think the Draft Sharks rankings have done fine. I personally, in my own drafts, have been too quick to say, but why would I take Brian Thomas Jr. when I can get Gabe Davis later? Like it's stupid. So I'm going to think better of rookie wide receivers going forward and look at the upside more because that's what our own advice tells me from our website. So I'm going to not ignore our own advice. My closest things to targets on this team, Jared, are a couple of very late round guys that really are more best ball factors in lineup setting, but could still be guys that you stash at the end of a roster in a lineup setting league. It's Jalen Coker first at wide receiver 85. And the case for him, on my board at least, is that he's wide receiver 85. Xavier Legette is wide receiver 64. I think Jalen Coker is just a better player. He outperformed Legette in their first season in the NFL, despite arriving as an undrafted free agent and Legette arriving as a late first rounder. So I think Jalen Coker's better. After they took Tet McMillan, I got less interested because I don't think there's room for a second wide receiver to actually give us fantasy value here. But sticking him on the end of a best ball roster and maybe even stashing him on a deep bench, we'll see what happens. I'm certainly still interested in Dynasty. The other one, running back Trevor Etienne that you talked about, RB75, Rico Dowdle's RB56. I don't think Rico Dowdle's that good. I know that Chuba Hubbard is not that good at receiving, and there's always the risk that Chuba Hubbard gets hurt. So I'm not interested in Chuba Hubbard. We'll talk more about him in a minute. And I'm realizing that if I'm not interested in Chuba Hubbard and I still think that Rico Dowdle is a schlub, then I might as well stick Trevor Etienne at the end of some fantasy benches.
Yeah, I'm with you on both of those, really. I haven't been taking a ton of these other Panthers running backs just because I don't know who's going to win the number 2 spot. I do think if Hubbard missed time, we'd probably see Rico Dowdle and Trevor Etienne splitting work to some extent. But the fact that Etienne's going, 19 RB spots lower than Rico Dowdle, and I think Etienne's the more exciting prospect. We kind of know what Dowdle is. He had a nice season last year, but I think that's as good as it's going to get for him. Maybe Etienne has more upside than that. So he's the one I'd take a shot on there. I have no issue with going that late. He did do some good things last year. 10.4 yards per target. That was 7th among 106 qualifying wide receivers. 1.72 yards per route run was 43rd among those 106 qualifying wideouts. He easily beat Legette in both of those marks. I just don't know if Coker is going to find a role in this team. I was reading some articles on the first day of Panthers training camp, and Tet McMillan stood out. The other wide receiver that got some buzz, we haven't even mentioned his name yet, is Hunter Renfrow, who they signed after being out of the league last year. Renfrow was getting some work with the first team offense because he caught some balls from Bryce Young. All those other Panthers wide receivers are cheap. I'm not taking any of them at this point outside of best ball teams that I've drafted Bryce Young on.
Agreed. Bryce Young is fine at his QB 24 price for me. Also not somebody that I'm targeting, though.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit higher on Bryce Young than you are. He's one of my favorite targets, like in that quarterback 3 range for best ball. And that's where I'm drafting Bryce Young at this point. I don't think he's an option in 1 quarterback lineup setting leagues at this point. 2 quarterback and super flex, you can take a shot on him. But Bryce Young, obviously horrible rookie year, horrible start to 2024, was benched for 5 games last year. Takes back over in week 8. The raw numbers weren't huge. 210 passing yards per game, 1.5 passing touchdowns per game. He was quarterback 17 in fantasy points from week on, but some of the more advanced metrics, PFF passing grade had him 6th among 35 qualifiers from week 8 on last year. He was 1st in PFF's big time throw rate, which is passes downfield into tighter coverage, passes of more difficulty. Second year in Dave Canales' system for Bryce Young now. He adds Tetairoa McMillan, which is huge. We talked about how bad this Panthers pass catching core was last year. PFF had them as the worst team in, team receiving grades last year. So Tetairoa McMillan, a big addition. Then the last point on Bryce Young that I think goes overlooked by some people is his rushing ability. He averaged 15.8 rushing yards per game as a rookie, 20.1 rushing yards per game across his 12 starts last year. So that's pacing for like 350 rushing yards over the course of a full season, which is definitely something. He's also averaged 6.1 yards per carry for his career so far. That's 3rd highest among 35 qualifying quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons. So I could just see him taking a step forward as a passer, adding some rushing production. And again, kind of like Michael Penix, I think we could look up at the end of the year, and Bryce Young's probably not going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, but if he finishes like quarterback 15, 16, I would not be surprised at all. And especially in best ball, or in 2 quarterback super flex leagues, that could definitely be valuable considering he's going well into the 20s in terms of ADP.
Adam Thielen, wide receiver 69, Jatavian JT Sanders, tight end 29. If you want to take those guys at those prices, fine. They don't stand out to me. I think the Panthers will be in trouble if Adam Thielen continues to get as many targets for them as he did even last year. Last year was down from the year before. It'll be bad news for the Panthers if he's still as prominent as he has been so far for them.
I agree. It's amazing how efficient Thielen still was last year. 9.9 yards per target, 2.06 yards per route run. But he turns 35 in August. He's missed a bunch of time with injuries. I got to imagine that the end is near for Adam Thielen. So not someone I'm drafting outside of Bryce Young teams. Sanders is a little interesting. I thought he was a good-looking prospect. His production at Texas was solid. I know he didn't test as a good athlete, but he was also a 5-star recruit coming into Texas. Sanders split time with Tommy Tremble when both guys were healthy last year, but in 5 games without Tommy Tremble, Sanders scored as the tight end 17 in PPR points per game. Tremble had offseason back surgery. He might not be ready for the start of the season. I just think there's a path for Sanders, this second-year tight end, to emerge as the clear target leader at the position. If he does that, again, we're talking best ball only, but at tight end 29, if this is the guy that's getting 70% of their outs, he could definitely pay off.
I have nothing against him at cost. I don't think the ceiling is high enough where I'm going to regret not having him. So for lineup setting, he isn't really going to factor into my plan. We'll see what happens. I'm open to the possibility that he's fantasy relevant this year. On the fade side, I'm focused on Chuba Hubbard here. And the first thing is that he lacks that receiving ability. Obviously, he's going to catch some passes, and the Panthers didn't pay him $8 million a year on the extension that they gave him late last season to just have him run the ball and be Derrick Henry receiving wise. But they also brought in Rico Dowdle, brought in Trevor Etienne, clearly to help in that area where Hubbard is deficient. And he's going early enough. Like RB17 is not super early, but it's early enough that if you have one of the 2 main areas that you're deficient in, then that's downside risk to you. The other factor here is that Hubbard's ADP is still ahead of Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, James Conner. And Jared, that's like saying, hey, Matt, I know your 3 kids need you, but why don't you instead buy dinner for this other kid that's just not very good?
Hubbard is one of the guys I've probably gone back and forth on most this offseason, whether he's a target for me or not. I think you made the best point there is that, for me, especially Alvin Kamara going behind him, I'm taking Kamara every time if I have to make that decision straight up. And I would even lean towards Joe Mixon and James Conner over Chuba Hubbard. I think they're close. So Hubbard, like you said, RB17 in ADP. He was RB13 in PPR points per game last year. He was splitting work early on. If you just look at his final 13 games, he was RB8 in PPR points per game. So he is already quite a bit discounted from where he finished last year. He was excellent as a runner last year. 4.8 yards per carry, 4th in rush yards over expected per attempt, 7th in yards after contact per attempt, 9th in PFF rushing grade. Really bad as a pass catcher, though. And that's the big question here, I think, is just how will he lose work in the passing game and how much work will he use? Because he averaged 3.8 targets per game over his final 13. He was getting that work, but he definitely could lose it this year because he was inefficient. Last note I'll make here is that we only have 2 seasons of Dave Canales as a play caller, but those 2 seasons so far have produced Rachaad White as RB10 in PPR points per game with the Bucs, and then Chuba Hubbard last year finishing RB13. So it's too early to say that Canales wants to ride a feature back, but through 2 seasons, that's what he's done.
Yeah, I mean, he should be a feature back. I think we'll get less receiving this year unless Etienne and Dowdle don't work out the way that the teams hope. And we mentioned that the Panthers added both of them, but it's not like they invested a whole lot in either one, so they could be more so insurance. And that insurance comes with some boost in the area that they think could be better, as opposed to, hey, we want to take some of these targets away from Chuba Hubbard and give them to somebody who can actually do something with them. So we'll see where it goes. I very well might just be wrong on Chuba Hubbard throughout his career. I've been that way to this point. Sometimes I'm too stubborn. New Orleans Saints are up next. Jared, what did the team look like in 2024, as though that really matters with all the things that have changed since then?
Yeah, the team looked really good for the first 2 weeks of the season. The Saints scored 47 points in week 1 and then 44 points in week 2. I think those games came against the Cowboys and Panthers, who ended up being like 2 of the worst defenses in the NFL. The rest of the way, their final 15 games, the Saints averaged 16.5 points per game. They finished the year 24th in points, 21st in yards, 17th in yards per play. This offense might have dealt with the most injuries in the NFL last year. Derek Carr missed 7 games. Chris Olave missed 9 games. Rashid Shaheed missed 11. Alvin Kamara missed 3. Taysom Hill missed 9. So that was definitely part of it, but there were definitely other issues at play here, which, as you said, Matt, the team hopes to address with these offseason changes.
Yeah, and they fired the head coach before that season even ended. Dennis Allen was gone at that point. Kellen Moore is the new head coach this year. After 1 year as Eagles offensive coordinator, I'm sure you've got more notes on Kellen Moore because I think you're president of his fan club, or at least secretary. 2023 as the Chargers OC for Kellen Moore, 4 years as Dallas's OC before that. So a pretty good track record of offensive success, even if he didn't last with the Chargers. The 1 year in Philly propelled him into a head coaching gig. His offensive coordinator, Doug Nussmeier, who was the quarterback's coach for Moore at each of those 3 OC stops. First turn as an OC for Nussmeier in the NFL, but he's an experienced coach, 55 years old, 10 years as a college offensive coordinator across 5 FBS stops. That included Alabama, Michigan, and Florida. The biggest change is a new quarterback. Derek Carr suddenly had to retire. Seems like he even surprised the team with that news. They're hoping that second rounder Tyler Shuck is the answer. It's a weird answer because he's a second-round pick who spent 7 years in college but played only 42 games. That's 6 games per year because of extensive injury issues. Just 1 full season as a starter. That was last year at Louisville. We'll see what that means for Tyler Shuck in the pros. I'm sure that New Orleans was not planning to start him right away when drafting him, although they obviously like him to pick him in round 2. The offense doesn't feature a whole lot of change otherwise. The biggest change really will be the healthy returns of Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. You already mentioned them missing time. They played 14 total games between them last year. Olave was still third among Saints in targets behind Alvin Kamara, Juwan Johnson, despite playing in only 8 games.
Yeah, minor additions here. They added Brandon Cooks, who might be their wide receiver 3. They added Devin Neal, 6th-round rookie. They added Cam Akers to the backfield as well. They spent the 9th overall pick of this spring's draft on Kelvin Banks, who's expected to start at left tackle right away. But a lot of the primary pass catchers and weapons return here. And yeah, just going back to Kellen Moore, I think he's good news for this offense. There are obviously a lot of issues and concerns with the offense, but I do think Kellen Moore is good news. Beyond the fact that he's just had success in his 6 OC stops in terms of points and yards and all that stuff, he runs fast-paced offenses consistently. All 6 of his offenses have ranked top 9 in plays per game. They've all averaged at least 65 plays per game. For perspective, only 4 teams reached that mark last year. The Saints were at 60.7 plays per game. Now, we don't have them projected for 65 plays per game. I just don't think they're going to be a good enough offense to get there. But we have them projected right now for 63.3, which is a bit above average and 2.5 more plays per game than they averaged last year. So I do think play volume could be on the Saints skill position player side this season.
The other good news for their offense is everybody is skeptical enough of the team that if there's a player you like, he's probably going at a solid price in ADP. We'll start the player targets with the obvious one, Alvin Kamara. If you've watched our show, listened at all, then you were probably waiting for us to talk about Alvin Kamara. He's one of my primary targets at this point at running back, just RB18 in ADP. So you can even be a little bit worried about some age decline and still target Alvin Kamara at that price. He finished last year as the number 1 running back in expected PPR points per game. That's because he easily led the position in targets per game, and all of the issues that this year's team has point to the Saints likely needing him to do something like that again. I mean, having a worthwhile receiving running back is just going to help a rookie quarterback. And even when it's not planned, he'll be a safety valve for when that rookie quarterback doesn't have the options downfield and needs to get rid of the ball.
There are definitely concerns with Alvin Kamara. He's 30 years old now. The offense in general is a concern, but I just think that's all baked into the price tag. Again, like you said, man, this is a guy that finished first in expected PPR points per game last year, fifth in actual PPR points per game. He's going RB15, RB17, somewhere in that range, in ADP, depending on the site you're looking at. Kamara now, he's finished as a top 13 running back in PPR points per game in all 8 of his NFL seasons. And last year was actually his most PPR points per game since 2020. His yards after contact per attempt rebounded last year. It was his best since 2021. His yards per route run last year was his best since 2020. So in a lot of ways, it was kind of a bounce back season for Kamara last year. He's in decline. He's not the elite running back he once was, but I think he's still good enough for the role he's going to play in this offense, especially in the passing game, to pretty easily pay off his ADP.
And it's important to note that in the whole vein of running backs don't matter, the key to that is the workload matters. And that's what Alvin Kamara is in line for. And the kind of work that he thrives on is the kind of work that he can be a less good player at and still thrive on. It's that receiving stuff. Even if he's down in yards per catch, which he wasn't last year, by the way, but even if that declines this year, if he's getting 80 targets and getting 6 yards per catch on it, that's still going to be a productive running back, especially from his draft price. I'm not really targeting Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. I think their values are fine. I think there's certainly plenty of room for them to outperform those draft positions. Not specific targets for me because of this offense, because I doubt their abilities to become guys that I comfortably start week to week throughout the season.
Yeah, it's fair. I'm definitely higher on them than you are. I think one of the reasons beyond Kellen Moore is just that this is going to be a super concentrated offense. We're not going to talk about many other players behind Alvin Kamara and these 2 wide receivers. And I do think a whole bunch of the fantasy points are going to go through these 3 guys. I actually think Rashid Shaheed is the better value among these 2 wide receivers at this point. I think Chris Olave is better and will score more fantasy points, but Rashid Shaheed's going wide receiver 56 in ADP. He was wide receiver 23 in PPR points through week 6 last year before his season-ending knee injury. He was wide receiver 26 in expected PPR points per game over that span. 23% target share for Shaheed last year, even alongside Chris Olave. This was a concentrated offense last year when these guys were healthy. And Shaheed's just been a very efficient player throughout his career. Last year, 2.04 yards per route. That's a good number. Anything above 2 is really good. 8.5 yards per target for Shaheed last year. That was actually a career low. He's at 10.4 yards per target for his career. That's actually tops among 164 active wide receivers with 100 plus career targets. Like, he has been super efficient on a per target basis. And I just think he returns as the clear number 2 target in this passing game. So even though I don't think it's going to be a great offense, quarterback play is a concern. I think Shaheed is good enough and the volume is going to be good enough for him to pretty easily beat that wide receiver 56 price.
Yeah, it's fair to say at this point that we don't even know for sure that Chris Olave is better than Rashid Shaheed. So the fact that they're like 20 spots apart in positional ADP makes a case for Shaheed. Olave, the case is he was a 3rd-round pick last year. Now he's bottom of wide receiver 3 territory. So unless you think that he's not good, he's kind of a why not pick once you're looking down in that range.
Yeah, and I think Shaheed's good. I do think Chris Olave is a better wide receiver. This guy's a former 1st-round pick. He just turned 25 years old. It's kind of easy to forget because we haven't seen him a lot, especially last year with all the concussion issues. And obviously is the risk, that all the concussions. And I think it's fair to say another concussion, he probably misses more time at least than the average player would. So that's the risk. But he opened his career with wide receiver 27 and wide receiver 21 finishes in PPR points per game. Olave has now topped a 23.5% target share and 2.05 yards per route in each of his first 3 NFL seasons. So he's been a good target earner. He's been efficient on his targets. Only 4 other wide receivers have topped those marks over the last 3 seasons. Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, CD Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like 4 guys who are all going in the top 15, 18 picks of fantasy drafts. We all think of them as elite wide receivers. Chris Olave is in that bucket in terms of earning targets and being efficient on those targets. I think the targets are going to be there again this year. We'll see about the efficiency, but at a wide receiver 35 price tag, when Olave's on the field, I think he's going to outproduce that.
Certainly not a player I'm arguing against at the cost it takes to get him. I am open to the possibility that Kendre Miller is just not going to be good in the NFL. I'm open to, Devin Neal beating him out, Cam Akers maybe beating him out. I'm still also taking Kendre Miller at his RB78 price tag. It's the very end of drafts. Like, it's hard for me to let a best ball draft end right now without making Kendre Miller my last pick, just because he is a holdover. He has gotten some slight buzz from beat writers. And even though we like Alvin Kamara, the ideal scenario for the Saints is somebody else taking a decent amount of the rushing work, even when Alvin Kamara is healthy. And then obviously there is the injury risk that would vault the value of whoever is the RB2 there. So Kendre Miller is just an easy guy to click with no real downside, because even if he's a zero at his current price, I've lost nothing really.
Yeah, I've forced myself to back off Kendre a little bit. I think it's pretty clear that this running back 2 job is up for grabs under a new coaching staff. And like you said, Matt, Kellen Moore has no ties to Kendre Miller. Now, when he was on the field last year, the advanced stuff, the tackle breaking stuff, the yards after contact stuff for Kendre Miller was still really good. I still think he's a good running back. I think he's the second best running back on this team, and to me is the favorite to win that number 2 job if he stays healthy and all else is equal. I just think it's far from guaranteed that he is the number 2 running back. I think it's far from guaranteed he's even on this roster by week 1. For those reasons, I'm still taking Kendre Miller, just not quite as aggressively as I was 2 or 3 months ago.
Nobody on this team is going early enough to actually be a fade for me. These are the guys that I would put in my I don't care bucket. I'm just not interested. Juwan Johnson, tight end 30. Tyler Shuck, QB 31. Devin Neal, RB 71. We'll see what's said about him as we get through training camp and preseason, but right now I'm not targeting a 6th round rookie.
Yeah, definitely with you on Neal and Shuck. I actually think Juwan Johnson is a good best ball pick. I think there's no room for him in lineup setting leagues. He does not have the upside to be a spot start option, but I think in best ball at a tight end 30, he's locked into a role. He signed a 3-year, $31 million deal back in March. So, he's part of this team's plans. He's part of Kellen Moore's plans. He finished tight end 21 in PPR points per game last year. Again, it's not going to help you in lineup setting, but in best ball, that's nice for the price tag. And the other thing with Juwan Johnson, he got a really big usage spike with Taysom Hill out last season. First 12 games of last year, Taysom Hill played most of those. 60% route rate for Juwan Johnson, 3.3 targets per game on a 10% target share. Final 5 games of the year without Taysom Hill, 80% route rate, 5.4 targets per game on a 16% target share. He was tight end 15 in expected PPR points per game over those final 5. And with Taysom Hill, nasty knee injury last year. He's into his 30s now. I'm not sure he's going to play much at all this season. That could definitely mean good things for Juwan Johnson's role. Again, in a passing game where there's room for him to be the 4th option. We know it's going to be Kamara and the 2 wide receivers, but there's basically nothing behind those 3 guys. Johnson, he could get a 14, 15% target share this year. And again, in best ball at his price tag, I think he could definitely be helpful.
That's fine. That's a lot more words than I was expecting to hear about Juwan Johnson today, though.
It's my guy. This is my team. I have way too much Saints. It scares me. But like you kind of said at the open, Matt, I think they're all just underpriced because of the concerns with the quarterback. But I think the skill position talent is good, and I think the coaching is going to be good.
They're all priced at why not levels, but I would be petrified if I was entering 2025 calling the Saints my team. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, also not my team, but still an interesting one. What did they look like in 2024?
Yeah, a really strong season for the Bucs under former OC Liam Cohen. The Bucs last year, 4th in points, 3rd in yards, 3rd in yards per play. Pretty balanced offense as well. They were 20th in pass rate. The Bucs last year, 4th in rushing yards as a team, 3rd in passing yards. They were the only team to finish top 5 last year in both rushing yards and passing yards. You obviously had Baker Mayfield with the massive season. The skill position talent was good even when Chris Godwin was not healthy. Their note too about the Bucs is their offensive line was excellent. They were top 6 in ESPN run block win rate, adjusted line yards, PFF pass blocking grade, ESPN pass block win rate, top 6 unit. This was one of the best O-lines in the NFL last year.
The biggest change for this year's team is that offensive coordinator Liam Cohen is gone. He's now the head coach in Jacksonville. This is the 2nd straight year that the Bucs have lost their OC to a head coaching gig. And Jared, we, the collective fantasy universe, have credited both Liam Cohen last year and Dave Canales the year before with boosting Baker Mayfield. I wonder if we have it wrong. What if Baker Mayfield's about to become like the QB version of Sean McVay, and he's got this coaching tree that's branching out from his own resurgence in Tampa Bay? What do you think?
Baker deserves plenty of credit, but I think what Cohen did last year, he deserves a lot of credit. We gave Dave Canales a lot of credit for what he did for the 2023 Bucs. That team was 20th in point score, 23rd in yards, 21st in yards per play. Last year under Cohen, the Bucs jumped into the top 4 in all those metrics. We also talked on the Coaching Changes podcast about Cohen's run at Kentucky. His team, the Kentucky offense was great. He left for a year. The offense fell off a cliff, and then Cohen returned the following season, and they rebounded. So we have a decent track record now of Cohen making offenses better, even the first year he arrived. So I do think his loss is a concern for this offense.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll see where it goes. New guy, Josh Grizzard, was the pass game coordinator last year, so at least familiar with the scheme that they were running. 7 years on the Dolphins staff before that. Started in Miami under Adam Gase, then stayed through the Brian Flores run, then 2 years with Mike McDaniel before moving to Tampa Bay. It doesn't sound like he's planning to change a whole lot from last year's approach, which would make sense given how well the Buccaneers offense fared last year. The Bucs did draft Emeka Egbuka, 19th overall wide receiver out of Ohio State. Sensible value as their third receiver, regardless of if he's playing any larger role than that right away, especially with Mike Evans near the end of his career, maybe even done with the Bucs after this season. Chris Godwin's ankle situation, though, adds importance to Egbuka, could push his role immediately because we recently learned that Godwin had a second offseason procedure on that ankle. It's being reported like it was a minor clean out. I'm not a doctor. I don't really know what a minor clean out is. All I know is if you're cutting open somebody's body and doing something to it, then there's some risk that it's going to take him a while to recover from it. We've got no Chris Godwin on the field yet. We'll see how soon that changes, but the longer he stays out, the more chance there is for Egbuka to become a significant part of the offense. The O-line that you mentioned returns all of its pieces, but left tackle Tristan Wirfs had right knee surgery in July. It was to fix an issue that wound up being more damaged than they originally thought. Now they're expecting him to miss at least the first couple games. We're going to have to watch that one because certainly losing their star left tackle could hurt both the run game and the pass game.
Just another reason beyond Liam Cohen to at least be wary of potential regression from this offense in general.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the biggest regression candidate in a few minutes, but first, the player targets. Jared, who are you targeting among these Bucs?
Old man Mike Evans is my favorite target on this team at this point. You know, it might have been Godwin before this latest news. I think you got to back off him at least a little bit at this point, but any Godwin injury issues obviously only helps Mike Evans, who is wide receiver 20 in ADP right now. We have him ranked wide receiver 15. Last year, he was wide receiver 11 in PPR points per game. And actually, if you omit 2 games that he left early with hamstring trouble, Evans was wide receiver 4 in PPR points per game. He was wide receiver 12 in expected PPR points per game. As always, played a massive role near the end zone for the Bucs. Second most end zone targets for Mike Evans last year. He was 9th among receivers in expected receiving touchdowns. And listen, despite the fact that he's getting up there in age now, career high 2.41 yards per route run for Mike Evans last year. That was 7th best among 84 qualifying wide receivers. So no signs of decline from this guy who has now finished as a top 20 wide receiver in PPR points per game in 9 straight seasons.
We have aging curve data that we built based on more than 2 decades of NFL player data to show us how different player archetypes, even within a position, age. So we know that age 32, which is the season Mike Evans is heading into, is a particular flashpoint for wide receivers, where historically we've seen many wide receivers drop off sharply in production. You can't ignore that, even with somebody as good as Mike Evans, but the market is already pricing that in. So we also can't ignore that he's coming off, like you said, one of the best seasons of his career. Mike Evans remained a very good player, and he's the one piece that we know is good heading into this year. He's still going to get the ball. There are plenty of other guys to question within that Bucs offense. So I'm with you. I'm taking Mike Evans where he's going. I'm doing so comfortably because he's wide receiver 20 in ADPs, commonly going in round 4. Even if he falls off from there and lets me down versus that draft position, I don't think he's going to bust completely unless he gets hurt. I'm pretty comfortably taking Mike Evans in that range. I would have been more comfortable taking Chris Godwin, like you said, before the latest surgery news. Still, with Godwin, wide receiver 39 is factoring in that risk, where even if it just ends up being a dud kind of season, that's not killing your roster. And I'd rather chase the upside on the guy who before the ankle injury last year was wide receiver 3 in points per game.
Yeah, wide receiver 39 ADP and potentially still falling. It's going to be tough to completely avoid him at that type of price tag. I think it's safe to expect Godwin to get off to a slow start. Whether he even plays the first couple weeks of the season, he might not. And if he does, I would expect a slow start, especially that they have Egbuka now and you potentially pick up some of those snaps and targets. But like you said, Matt, he was excellent before going down last year. Career best yards per route run for Chris Godwin last year, as well as Mike Evans. And I keep going back to the fact that the Bucs gave Chris Godwin a 3-year, $66 million contract this offseason. Like, obviously before this latest second surgery, but after the initial ankle injury, after the first surgery, they felt good enough at that point to give him a pretty big deal. So that gives me some confidence that at least by like October, going to be back in a full-time role for this offense. And if he is, he's going to easily beat his current ADP.
And by the way, you can feel free to handcuff him with Emeka Ibuka. That's not usually what you would do at wide receiver, but I think it's a concentrated enough offense with a quarterback who's coming off of 2 good seasons. I think that there's room for that team to support Ibuka, especially if Godwin's not playing. And then you've also just got insurance versus whatever happens with Chris Godwin. Ibuka's at wide receiver 47 in ADP, which is above where we have him projected. But I think he's one to not totally ignore the projections, but kind of overlook them based on how you're building that team. I know that in general, I want to not be out on Ibuka because there are multiple paths to him being relevant this year. And he's just the kind of guy at Ohio State who, just delivered, not necessarily the flashiest player for them, and actually lower in flashiness than many of the other wideouts that they've had in recent years, but just reliable. Somebody that you throw the ball to often. He's going to catch it, might not score 12 touchdowns, but he's also probably going to catch 65, 70% of the targets.
Yeah, Ibuka is Ohio State's all-time leader in career receiving yards. That's damn impressive considering all the excellent wide receivers that have come through that school. Ibuka goes 19th overall in this spring's draft, so he gets the good draft capital. I like Ibuka better in lineup setting leagues than best ball. Just as an example, he's going in the same range as like Darnell Mooney. In best ball, like without having to pick and choose when to start these guys, Mooney's probably going to give you more starter level weeks, assuming health for all these guys. But Ibuka's the one where really if Chris Godwin or Mike Evans miss time, Ibuka's he might already be close to a full-time player as the number 3 wideout, but his playing time would grow. His targets would obviously grow. I think he's good enough. There's been so much positive buzz from Baker Mayfield, Todd Bowles. Everyone's talking up his professionalism, his readiness to contribute right away, which is not a surprise coming from Ohio State, being a 4-year college player. I think he's ready to make an immediate impact. If Godwin is not ready for week 1, Ibuka could get off to a hot start and keep it rolling from there, especially in lineup setting leagues. Ibuka is someone who I think is a really good wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 bench stash type of pick.
I even caught one of those fluffy TV packages one time where they talked about Ibuka picking up golf sometime within the past year and a half. And like less than a year later, people are like, how is this guy this good at golf? He just seems like that kind of guy that's good at whatever he does. And that's the kind of guy you want to bet on.
Exactly.
Jalen McMillan, wide receiver 71. I can't say that I've been that interested specifically because of Ibuka, but obviously there's a path and the price is fine. Cade Otton, similarly, not a tremendous player, but he's in a spot where he's clearly going to be the lead tight end. So, at some level, he just makes sense. Tight end 23, fine.
Otton's very similar to Juwan Johnson, where in best ball, I get it as a tight end 3. He's going to be on the field. I would just say be careful with Otton's production last year, though, because he was tight end 3 in PPR points in his 3 games without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. In games either one of those guys played, Otton was just tight end 22. Tight end 22 is kind of what you're expecting. Again, for best ball, it could give you some value.
Anybody else that you're targeting on this team?
Nope, that's it for targets.
What about the fade side?
Let's start with Baker Mayfield, right? Is the fade on this team. The one other guy I have here is a soft fade. I'm still not even sure about it. But Baker Mayfield at quarterback 7 ADP. And it's not only that, but he's, our consensus ADP has him going in the late 8th round right now. So not only I think is he a few spots too high among quarterbacks, but just you can get, I think, similar production 3-4 rounds later in fantasy drafts. Now, Baker was awesome last year, finished quarterback 4, but I just think the offense in general is going to take a step back. That's going to include Baker, and especially his touchdowns. 7.2% touchdown rate for Baker Mayfield last year. That led the league. It was the 7th highest touchdown rate among 228 quarterback seasons of 400-plus pass attempts over the last 10 years. Mayfield threw a touchdown on 4.6% of his passes over his first 6 NFL seasons. Even his first season with the Bucs, he was at 4.9%, which is like slightly above league average. I think you're going to see him dip much closer to that type of territory than the lofty heights he was at last year.
Yeah. Lamar Jackson is the active leader in passing touchdown rate. His career rate is 6.4%. So Baker Mayfield's number is coming down, and he could have the exact same season, but throw touchdowns on 5.5%, which is still good, as opposed to 7.2%. And suddenly you don't have a special fantasy quarterback. So I'm completely out on Baker Mayfield at cost, even though I don't think he's going to crash as a player, and I don't think he's going to bring the whole offense down. But I think at what you have to pay to get him, there's just no reason to, because even if he hits again, even if he goes at QB7 and is QB4 again, that's not a guy that's killing my season for not drafting. He would have to be QB1 overall to make me regret not drafting him. And that's not in the spectrum of possibilities here. The other guy that I'm guessing you were referring to is Bucky Irving, and I'm also not in on Bucky Irving at RB9. I love the player. I hope he keeps getting work like he did late last year, but I don't think that he's built to get that kind of workload. And I'm definitely not willing to bet on him at that late round 2 price tag that it requires to make that bet.
Yeah. Bucky Irving consensus ADP is going at 205. So in the middle of round 2, we have him 25th overall in our rankings, which seems right to me. Like, he's a guy, when you get to the 2-3 turn, early round 3, that's where I would consider Bucky Irving. He just doesn't get there often enough for me to draft him. He's a guy I hate fading because, like you said, Matt, we love the player, and he was so good last year. 5.4 yards per carry, 6th in rush yards over expected per attempt, 1st in yards after contact per attempt. He was also excellent in the passing game, 90% catch rate, 8.3 yards per catch, 6th among 37 running backs in yards per route run, 2nd in PFF receiving grade. His role did grow over the second half of the season, and it even grew further late in the year. The Bucs had that must-win Week 18 game. Bucky Irving dominated backfield work in that game. He dominated backfield work in their playoff loss. I just, like you said, Matt, I don't know if he can handle that much work throughout the course of a season, if the Bucs want him to handle that much work. He's only 192 pounds. We did have hamstring, toe, hip, back injuries last year. There was a part in the middle of the season where he was leaving games early multiple times because he was just getting banged up. So that's the big question. And I think at a mid-second round price tag, it's enough for me to get off Bucky Irving. If he's going in the 3rd round, he's a fine pick there.
Yeah, that's the thing. One season of evidence doesn't say, oh, if you give Bucky Irving the ball this much, he's going to get hurt. They might have been a coincidence. You could carry the ball half as much and just happen to get hurt. You could carry the ball just as much, not get hurt at all. But you have to bet a 2nd round pick to say, yeah, he can hold up to that work throughout the season. Just too expensive for me. Now, a lot of times, if I'm that out on the 1st running back, I try to make myself be in on the 2nd running back. That's not the case with Rachaad White here. Even though at RB45, I won't argue against him. He's not hurting you from there. And he's bound to be somewhat involved still, especially on the receiving side. I think if Bucky Irving were to go down this year, we would see a split between Rachaad White and Sean Tucker. So I'm much more interested in Sean Tucker at RB73 than I am Rachaad White at RB45.
Yeah, Sean Tucker is my most drafted Bucs running back. I take him a lot at the very end of drafts. If either of these guys miss time, I do think we're looking at a commitment. We saw it last year. Rachaad White missed a game, and Sean Tucker had a massive game against the Saints. He's a good running back. I'm kind of out on Rachaad White, too. I think he's going to fall just short of standalone value. I do think he'll be involved, especially in the passing game, but probably not enough to be even a flex play in lineup setting leagues. And then again, as a handcuff, he'd be someone we'd probably be ranking as a lower end RB2 if Bucky Irving misses time, but he's not going to be like a league winner because I do think Sean Tucker would be involved.
And a chance that Sean Tucker just outperforms him if they're both in that situation. Rachaad White is like Austin Eckler, but he doesn't have the excuse of being old.
Yeah, that's right.
And by the way, Sean Tucker is similar for me. I get to the end of every draft and I'm like, all right, should I take Sean Tucker or should I take Kendre Miller? Or do I need to take somebody else that I haven't taken lately?
Exactly.
See how we project all these players at draftsharks.com right now. And when there's an injury or a delayed return or even a shift in camp buzz, you don't need to wonder whether your rankings are up to date. The answer is yes, your rankings will reflect those changes. We're watching all of the training camp developments. We are hitting the most important news in our free Shark Bite section. And most importantly, we're constantly updating our projections this time of year. Sometimes it's even just me working on an article and saying, Jared, I don't like how early this guy is going, or this guy's sitting too high in our rankings and we need to change him. And then he and I argue about it for like 15 minutes and we make somebody else give their take to decide where that player is going to land. That's the kind of stuff we're doing all the time this time of year. Your rankings will be up to date no matter when you need them, no matter when you are drafting or what format you are playing. Draft Sharks is ready to be your unfair advantage.